Hello all and welcome to DoiT's recap of reInvent. So today we'll be going through more on the machine learning and analytics side of it, doing some AI. But essentially we're going to be sort of breaking this down into the elements that we felt were relevant to this particular talk today. So we're going to be looking at something called commodity machine learning. We'll then step into sort of the innovations and the iterations that's been happening in AWS at reInvent. There's a small section that we've got which is important around costs, and then we'll sort of go into the normal sort of product announcements. Well, some of them anyway, because there was hundreds of them announced. So from there, it's just an open discussion around, what do we think was interesting? What do we think would appeal to you guys? And really just a discussion between some seasoned experts that we've got in the room with us as well. So my name is Jason Gregson. You may have seen me on the 8-Bit Breakfast Show. And today we'll be introducing a couple of people, one Joshua, the other Evgeny, and we'll hand over to them to introduce themselves. So go for it, Joshua.
Hi, I'm Joshua. I'm a senior cloud architect at DoiT, and I had the pleasure of being at reInvent 2021. Incredible experience, largest hotel under one roof in the world, 20,000 people, and a lot of energy around AWS. Evgeny?
My name is Evgeny. I'm a technical director at DoiT. I haven't had the pleasure of being at reInvent this year, like my two colleagues here. But I have read a lot about it, and I bet I can pitch in some details about the various products that have been released and the details around them.
Great stuff. And yeah, I'm a senior solution architect here, or cloud architect here at DoiT. I've been here for just under a couple of years now. So thanks for the introductions, guys. So commodity machine learning. Evgeny, what do you mean about sort of commodity machine learning? What are you actually describing there?
Right. So when we think about services related to machine learning in AWS, we mostly have two types of services. One type is when AWS provides you a way to create all these advanced machine learning models and use them and all that thing that is very professional. But the other kind of service that AWS provides is when AWS gives you a service that is using machine learning internally. So it's a kind of a no-brainer. You don't need to do anything special to get benefits from machine learning. That's my take on commodity machine learning, and it has been developing and adding more and more features throughout the recent years, more and more. And we will mention several of the latest releases in that term on AWS.
Just give us a quick example or a couple of examples of commodity machine learning just to help cement it, really.
Well, people who are familiar with AWS, I guess they already heard a service called Recognition, which with a K, it can recognize images and recognize people, objects, and kind of translate the image into text. So that would be a commodity thing. There's another, or is it? There's also a what's it called? The speech recognition, where it can listen to voice and recognize the words being said and transcribe them into text.
Okay, yeah. Textract, is it?
Textract, I think it's when it looks at an image of text and recognizes the text written in the image.
Yeah. There's things like Kendra as well. So Kendra does the sort of the NLP side of it as well. So a search engine based around NLP. So the idea being that you can actually use some search engine facilities that are just, you provide it with the data, and Amazon do all the heavy lifting to allow you to have a very natural language processing in terms of, searching for it as well. But thanks for the explanation anyway.
I remember when machine learning was math. So if you got into it, you were reading about derivatives and gradients, and that's all well and good. Some of us studied that way back in university. But on a day-to-day basis, we just can't work on that level as engineers. And over the last 10, 15 years, it's gotten higher and higher level. First of all, libraries that bundled up those algorithms and let us use them directly, and then libraries that hid the algorithms from us, and we were just able to put in input and get our output. But even there, you have to choose your algorithm, you have to understand what the input and output mean, what your metrics mean, and we're trying to get to business and solve value-added problems. So as much as possible, we want to use bundled solutions like the ones that Evgeny mentioned, ones that give us the value directly, where we have to touch the machine learning as little as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Amazon's got a nice phrase for that called undifferentiated heavy lifting. It's basically saying that there's a whole load of stuff that you need to learn. There's a whole load of stuff in the domain that you need to be experts on. Here's all the stuff that you need to learn in order to just start with your journey. So we've already done all of this. So do you really need to be, as a marketing company or whatever, need to understand how to work a database, how to work a machine learning workflow? The short answer is probably not. So you can then use a service provisioned by Amazon, which enables you to move quicker, deliver what you need to do, take that data, turn it into information, knowledge, whatever that may be. And then from there, you can start to explore the art of the possible outside of that scope. So for me, I like a lot of this undifferentiated heavy lifting because it just makes things easier. You can just move quicker, get to the answers quicker, understand what it is, and then, potentially fail fast. It's not a 6-month roadmap to go and get a piece of it data, turning it into information, and then realize that actually it was the wrong question in the first place. So for me, that's the real value of this sort of commodity machine learning anyway.
Right. And sometimes it's just an improved experience with other services that AWS already has, which most of these are. And we can start mentioning some of the recent releases that are mostly improvements to existing services from AWS.
Yeah, go for it. We may as well start there.
Right. So AWS some years ago released a service that is oriented towards call centers. So when an agent is talking to a customer over the phone or VoIP or whatever, that phone call is being recorded, and that agent, of course, has a script of what he can, offer the customer, and et cetera, all the fancy stuff that call centers do. So they released a new feature that is actually transcribing the call in real time and summarizes the call in real time, understands what the call is about in real time while the call is in progress, and suggests to the agent what he should do. Like the agent, it might suggest that maybe the customer asked to change his subscription plan, and then the right prompt will jump in front of the agent to give him the options of the various subscription plans, and et cetera, et cetera. And all of these summaries are then fed into some database, of course, or whatever. And basically, in order to use that, you don't need to do any kind of machine learning of your own. You only need to use the AWS service, the AWS Connect service.
And it's important to realize that this is not just doing a machine learning algorithm for you, but the whole pipeline. Because in fact, 90% of machine learning is not machine learning, but rather data cleansing and ingestion. So once you realize that, you really appreciate a service that can just take in the raw input and give you the output.
Yeah, and my guess is that, if the customer is angry, then this thing will automatically detect the anger and
sentiment analysis.
Maybe a manager can come in and intervene or listen in on the call or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. It'd be nice to see some sentiment analysis in terms of this customer's looking angry, happy, whatever. Let's go and do something. Give him a big discount. That'd be great.
If it's not in there, it's probably coming.
Yeah, typical Amazon sort of fashion anyway. Well, it's they say they listen to the customers, and Werner was saying on his speech, on his keynote, that there's over 200 services and products. That's your fault because you've asked for them. So yeah, let's get some sentiment analysis if it isn't there anyway.
My guess would be that in 2020, 2021, this whole call center thing is getting pretty hot. There's a lot of reason why people have stopped meeting agents face to face and are using the phone more and more to resolve their service issues. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, definitely. Great stuff. Any more to add on that, Joshua?
Yes. So Amazon has taken on the call center as a business area. So it's not just the transcription; it's the whole process, the whole workflow of a call center. They're basically providing a prepackaged solution for some very large companies.
So let's talk about another commodity machine learning thing that came out, and that is an addition to TextRact. TextRact is, like I mentioned before, something that can read text out of an image And this time, AWS came out with TextRack that works on identity documents like passports, driving licenses, because again, there are more and more businesses today that are providing financial services online. They need all this know your customer stuff, and there are so many various situations that reading information from identity documents becomes more and more a necessary commodity to use. And I guess AWS wanted to get in on that, and they already have a service that provides reading text from images, so why not extend it to automatic identification document recognition. Now, the nice thing about this is that basically you give it an image in an API and you receive back all the data that is in that image, like the name, the expiration date, and everything else that you might imagine might be on that identity document. So I think it's pretty cool.
The thing that they're adding here is that you do not need a template. So before this feature, you could do this, but you would have to tell it, here is the name, here is the ID, here's the date of birth, and they magically figure all that out for you, and they map it to standard field names. So date of birth, you may call that internally DOB or birth date or whatever you want. But when you're integrating this into large systems, you want to know that all these different documents with date of birth have the same field name so that you can link them to each other. And that's what they're giving you here.
Excellent. And my guess is that they already can recognize many, many different nationalities and identity documents from various places, or at least some standardized ones like the USA ones or whatever.
Yeah, sure. I mean, do you know, just reading through the marketing and everything else that we understand about it right now, do you know if they're managing, so they're taking essentially US documents at the moment, obviously other regions will follow, and I know it's available in other regions anyway, but in terms of that standard, are they doing anything around the sort of data protection, PII, GDPR, or anything else? Is there anything in there that sort of mentions any element of that as well? Because I think one of the most difficult parts is obviously the identification of the information, taking an image, turning it into data and doing that side of it. I think equally on the other side of it is, how do we manage this data and make sure it's all safe and in the right places with the right controls and with the right governance around these things as well? So I'd like to see that side of it sort of exemplified a bit more from Amazon to say, yes, we can do this. And then additionally, we have these other parts as well. I don't know if there's been any sort of information around that.
Right. So as far as I know from a couple of years ago, most of these, like we said, commodity machine learning services like the TextRack and Comprehend and Translate and Transcribe and Poly, which turns text into speech, etc., they have been moving more and more towards being HIPAA compliant. And HIPAA is the regulation around medical records and private information in medical spheres. So I think they even had a release like a couple of days ago, I don't remember exactly which one, that said that they are even more strict about all of this data protection going on with these machine learning services. So I would believe that they have something that is satisfactory for the regulatory bodies.
Yeah, I was thinking something like, effectively you're going to take an image, do some munging on it and get some data out of it, and that image is going to be stored somewhere. So, for example, S3, and then you have something like Macy on top of it, identifying these documents and the clarification of those documents, so that you as an entity have that compartmentalization already done in terms of these are sensitive documents. And then from there, you can decide on whatever the policy is that you need to comply with in your local geographic region, wherever that may be. That would be a really nice sort of feature from this, where these documents are highly sensitive. And knowing that whole life cycle is actually managed for you as well, or at least the ability to invoke that life cycle anyway.
So it's great that they're putting together these vertical solutions, for example, for the call center, because Amazon makes it very clear that you, the customer, are responsible for your HIPAA and other compliance. However, they provide the tools for that, and their infrastructure layer is itself hardened to that. So as much as you can push off onto the Amazon layer, that takes off some responsibility for you. They've not just provided voice recognition, summarization, sentiment analysis, document recognition, but also an integrated solution. And that means that there's that many fewer pieces where you can make a mistake in leaking data.
Absolutely. And of course, AWS are constantly talking about shared responsibility model, where everything that is under their control is under their responsibility, but all the things that you do on top of that is your responsibility. And the higher level the service is, like the ones that we mentioned in terms of machine learning, the more responsibilities AWS take on themselves in order to protect the data, secure it, encrypt it, and delete it, whatever is required by the regulatory bodies.
That's a nice one. I like that. Anything that makes it easier, quicker, faster, and especially with the sort of pandemic and everything else that's going on, there's a lot more ownership and a lot more responsibility for companies to start providing not just SaaS services, but services that are in the cloud that allow customers to move faster, whether that's online banking or I know the amount of tests that I've had to do to travel internationally in terms of back and forth to reInvent. And a lot of the companies that I'm having to work with to provide this information to prove that I'm been vaccinated and clean and everything else in terms of the COVID virus, I fundamentally don't trust these companies that I'm passing all this information to, especially when you look at broken HTML forms and everything else. It's like, oh, wow, I've got to give up my highly personal data to websites that don't fundamentally work properly. So, yeah, anything that supports that makes it a bit easier and gives me the confidence to trust these, all the better.
Yeah, on the other hand, most companies that actually provide these services are somehow government sponsored, and they have a mandate to not use the cloud in many cases. So even though the cloud has this take it already works kind of solution right on the shelf, it's often not being used by the ones that you want them to use it.
Well, don't forget that there is a GovCloud. So the providers make a contract with various governments, for example, the United States, but not the only one, and they create a cloud that's customized for their needs.
Yeah, and governments are, well, in my experience, usually a little bit lagging in terms of new technologies. So these kinds of machine learning solutions are actually giving them a big jump forward in ways that they probably couldn't have done themselves if they choose to leverage their AWS GovCloud or whatever. Right. So we discussed a couple of services that are mostly related to business solutions, like the transcribes of text in call centers, and there's also the developers and operators that are using the cloud, and they get a couple of nice releases this year as well. So in terms of machine learning, of course. So one of them is DevOps Guru, and DevOps Guru is a service that has, I think it's about 1 or maybe 2 years old, but now it can also recognize various problems that occur in database instances in the RDS service, like weird performance issues, spikes in connections, and all kinds of weird things that shouldn't be happening there. And of course, well, it's a kind of a machine learning thing. And these are also being tracked, being reported, insights are being generated, and remediation is being suggested for the operators, so that, as we all know, there are so many services in the cloud today, it's very difficult to be an expert in each, and any bit of help from any of these can really help. So this is something that they came up with.
Yeah, so DevOps Gurus for RDSM.
Exactly.
It's particularly important with a relational database because you can have spikes in usage that actually have a good reason. Let's say a report is generated every morning. That's a spike, but that was on purpose. So you need machine learning to differentiate the spikes that you expected from the ones that you didn't expect. Sometimes companies will pay for an RDS that is actually not really in use most of the time, for better or worse. But then it maxes out. Is that okay? Is that not okay? For this, you need to understand the patterns, and that's what AWS is helping us with.
Yeah, in many cases, anomaly detection is very naive, and it doesn't really use any kind of artificial intelligence. But as Joshua just said, when it does, when it's smart anomaly detection, then it reduces the false positives and increases the positive positives, the true positives, I guess, and makes it less of a burden to listen to a huge amount of alerts that are not relevant and gives you the real alerts instead. Yeah.
Yeah, reducing that signal to noise ratio is always going to be extremely useful, especially for the people, normally the development environment anyway, but normally the developers that are sitting there trying to work out why a long running query is taking quite so long, or what's actually blocking customers from doing the next part, and that comes down to some of it down to architectural decisions and some of it down to deep-seated, deep understanding of how relational databases work in the first place. So yeah, anything that can help in that space and really sort of move that forward is going to help customers a lot.
Generally speaking, as a DevOps person myself, I know that I have like 1,000 things that I need to take care of. And if there's a clear signal that something is really, really important and I should really look at that, then it's a big help, because there's so much that goes wrong all the time everywhere that can be just safely ignored. Right. And so on to the next thing that is also kind of helping developers, and it's more security oriented, and that is a password and key detection in source code in Code Guru secret detector. The CodeStar services, they do builds, they do Git code repositories. There's a bunch of developer oriented CI/CD helper services in there, and one of the biggest, I would say, well, I don't know if it's the biggest, but it's a big problem, is when secrets inadvertently get into code and they leak in there, and then they're being used by malicious users to take control of accounts. And this new detector will scan everything and everywhere and will try and make sure that none of the secrets to access your account have been embedded into where they shouldn't have been.
And I can say as a consultant in DoiT that this is the #1 security breach that I help the customers with. Because what happens is that a key leaks out, and then the hackers get it and they start mining Bitcoin. It could be $20,000 in 1 hour. And it's so hard to prevent, because what is a secret? It's a file with some random looking string in it. What does it even mean to try to detect that? And for this, AWS is providing the intelligent systems that can detect patterns, can detect keys in your source code. It can be very difficult as a developer, even if you've set things up to not release your keys. It's so easy for one of these files to be in your home directory and then you accidentally check it in. So this is the #1 threat, and I'm glad that AWS is helping us. Whenever you hear about breaches in the news, about terrible exposures of customer data, and you wonder, is there anything that can be done? Well, the vendors like AWS are chasing behind and finding solutions. This is the only way we'll manage to solve that.
Yeah, and by the way, AWS has been scanning GitHub repositories, public ones, for a while. And if your AWS keys or even other clouds, if keys have been found in public repositories, those have been either disabled, or at least an email has been sent to the owner of the accounts. So it has been around for a while, and I guess they have just extended it into more services that are on AWS. And I also read that they give you a guided suggestion of what you should be doing, which is also good, because people...
Yeah, we all need remediation, yeah.
Sometimes people, they are told about a problem, but they don't know how they should be acting differently, so they just continue doing the same thing.
Yep, I think any tooling that's going to help customers in terms of their education to be able to move to that next level, because you've got customers, and we deal with the customers in all sorts of different stages of journeys, from migrations of DCs and old legacy applications to, cloud native solutions as well. But, with any of these applications, you hear a lot of horror stories about developers inadvertently, I can't imagine them doing it on purpose, embedding maybe an authentication code to an S3 bucket in an application that sits on an Android app, for example. Very difficult to discover afterwards, after the fact, until somebody reverse engineers the application and goes, brilliant, I now have the keys to that particular bucket. So anything like that, like this, for example, the Code Guru that goes off and starts to have a look at these things for you. You're sticking them through your pipeline. It enables the developers to just move that much quicker, a little bit faster in terms of understanding what's happening, but equally to really just sort of pair things back to where it should be. You shouldn't be putting, hard-coded secrets into files, into text files and everything else that's going to be running your application. So, yeah, I think it's a great idea.
I'd like to say that when it comes to security, it's never anybody's top priority because they're trying to grow their business. They're trying to sell. And you come to the CEO and you say, we've got some sort of security thing. Well, no security is perfect. And even with all the safeguards, it's not perfect. That's why organizations need outside tools that do as much as possible for them. It's the only way that it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think something like this actually brings home that security is everybody's responsibility, from, a junior developer all the way up to CTO, CIO, whatever it may be, to actually make sure that all of this is secured and just really embedding the notion that security is the responsibility of everybody. It's not one person at the end of the day trying to catch all of these security events. We're all responsible at all the walks of life and every stage of the application development that we need to actually be cognizant of. And I think something like this really sort of takes home that, it is everybody's responsibility and code is where most of it lies anyway. So let's start with there. So yeah, really good. I like it a lot.
Well, the last service is that kind of got some enhancements in terms of commodity machine learning and artificial intelligence is Amazon Kendra. To be honest, I don't know much about it. So maybe, Joshua, maybe you can tell us what Kendra is.
Well, it's a search API for when you want to build search into your applications. Now, it's not enough to just be able to search the text. As you could with Lucene, you want to have smart features, as some of us have encountered in Google, where it can extract relevant facts from the data. You want to have a dashboard, again, as we're all familiar with from the public Google search, but Kendra can provide that inside your application.
So they have released something called an experience builder, which I guess that when you want to integrate this Amazon Kendra search into your own website or your own internal portal for employees, then you need to maybe kind of customize it into which kinds of things it searches and which kinds of answers it provides. So it's supposedly easier now to do with some wizards that are provided in Amazon Kendra. As well as a new search analytics dashboard, which my guess is it shows what people are searching for, which is quite interesting. I mean, when you know what people are searching for, then you know what people don't know, and you can help them maybe into getting that information easier. And something called custom document enrichment. If I'm kind of looking at 2 seconds at the release announcement, I'm guessing that if you are adding documents that have text in them, speech in them, or ID documents in them, then it can integrate with all the other services that we mentioned and kind of add the additional information that is hidden in the images, perhaps, or hidden in the recordings.
Or hidden in the text. Think about entity extraction. An example of an entity is a person, right? A person has a name, an ID, whatever it is. That is a logical entity. So text documents logically are unstructured, likewise images or voice. And if you're going to do anything interesting with them, you want to enrich them by identifying the entities such as addresses or companies inside them, by classifying them. You have financial documents and medical documents which have different regulatory requirements. And this naturally happens as part of your ETL, extract, transform, and load. Kendra provides this as a service.
Excellent. That's
great. Thanks for the insights, Joshua. Appreciate it. Okay, so we've just sort of covered off sort of commodity machine learning, some of the elements around that's really going to help customers. So, on to the next item, which is innovations. So over to you, Evgeny.
This year, AWS released a couple of new types of processors, of chips, CPUs. They already have the Inferentia CPU that is tailored for machine learning, for inference mostly, which we will explain in a bit. But this year they have announced their custom Trinium processors that are just supposedly crazy good for training machine models. Now, this is very custom. This is for people who are interested in doing their own math, their own models, their own data crunching in terms of coming up with various insights and various ways of using machine learning. If I understand correctly, these beasts are just very large parallel processors which allow to do lots and lots of metrics multiplication or whatever math is required to do deep learning well. They have a huge amount of network and lots and lots of memory. So I think that the network is something like 800 gigabit per second. The memory is like 7 terabytes because all of these affect the speed and the quality and basically the ability of the size of machine learning, more precisely deep learning models that you are able to train using existing technologies. And this of course takes it a step further. And I'm sure Joshua can explain in a more technical way what this actually means.
Just to be clear, this is relevant only if you're already doing some high intensity training. If you're just getting into machine learning, by experimenting or doing some small models, it's not going to make a huge difference in the outcome. But if you have daily processing of very large amounts of data, then to the point where we're actually pushing the limits, then this will make a difference in lowering costs or increasing speed, which is, of course, the same thing.
Right. And another CPU they announced is the Graviton Generation 3, Graviton 3 processors, which are a continuation of the existing Graviton 2 ARM processors that AWS have been pushing really hard for the last couple of years because first of all, it is made by Amazon, and according to them, it's cheaper and it's better and all
faster.
The other pluses.
Yeah.
So if that is capable to be used in providing machine learning services, then of course it might make them cheaper as well.
Yeah, there's been a big focus on Graviton, and now with Graviton 3 as well, Graviton 2, Graviton 3. You're seeing it being used much more widely in the internal services from Amazon as well. If you look at OpenZFS, all of that is being backed up by Graviton processors now as well. So there's a lot more of a push from Amazon to start using their own processors, which obviously is going to drive down costs. And certainly, according to the marketing, it's going to improve performance as well. So it's going to drive down Amazon's costs, which in turn drives down the cost for its customers to be able to use it as well. So good to see. I've yet to see any sort of hard evidence around the Trinium processor in terms of the EC2 instance. But yeah, thanks. Good to see. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think also Trinium might be preview. I don't think it's available for everyone. You might need to ask permission from AWS to get access to it first.
Yeah. Have you got permission yet?
I don't have any machine learning to do on that scale yet. No.
How about you, Joshua? You got some free processors, some Triniums that you can go and play in the background?
Yes, this is going to be relevant not so much for experimenting as for the massive production processing. And if you are experimenting, good, go ahead and use it. But the real imperative to use it is only on the higher end.
Just a question of time before your AWS bill goes as a massive spike, and you too have been caught out by anomaly detection. Right, okay, moving swiftly onwards.
Onwards, there's a serverless inference endpoint thing. Now, I can explain at a newbie level what inference is. There's a difference between training and inference. Training is when you create the model, and inference is when you use it. And up until now, you already could add additional kind of virtual GPUs to your EC2 instances so that you can run inference of existing models on your instances. But of course, whenever you were not using those, you would still pay for them. With the serverless inference, you are getting kind of an auto-scaling that will bring in the inference whenever it's needed, and you will only pay when you are actually using inference on your instances. And I'll pass it on to Joshua to explain the difference between inference and what that is even.
Well, of course, machine learning starts with training, where you put in a lot of data where the answer is known. Afterwards, you query it, where the answer is not known. So, for example, if you have a lot of marketing data that shows that customers either buy or don't buy based on their characteristics, how long they've been with you, what other products they've bought, that's the training part. You teach the machine learning model these patterns. And then afterwards, you might send over some new customers. You might send over the information about some newly arrived potential customers and ask, is this one likely to make a purchase? And that's called inference or prediction. And it has very different characteristics. Training is usually the most intensive because you've got maybe gigabytes of data, maybe terabytes of data that you're processing. Prediction can be intensive. You may be doing batch prediction on many, many data items, or just one at a time. But in any case, you don't have those very large masses of data all at once that go into training. So it's a very different characteristic, and you may even want different chips. That's why we have the Trinium and the Inferentia chips that are different. In the case of the endpoints, Amazon and all the cloud providers have historically moved up from infrastructure as a service, where they're providing virtual machines, to a platform as a service, and then finally software as a service. So with inference endpoints to date, you were buying virtual machines, really. Yes, you bought them as an inference endpoint. That was the API you invoked. But when it came down to it, these were virtual machines that you could see in the EC2. And that means you may be wasting money if they're running and they're not needed at that moment. Yes, you could scale them, but that's not as responsive as you might want. With serverless, you don't even have to think about that. You're not in charge of the virtual machines at all. You just ask for the inference to happen, and Amazon takes care of the underlying compute to make it happen for you.
So it's like inference as a service instead of doing inference on your own servers.
Right, inference as a service, but with your models, unlike what we discussed earlier, where it was Amazon's models.
Great. Well, of course, it comes with all kinds of metrics in CloudWatch, and you can monitor it, and you can see how much you're using it. And I think another thing that I noted there is that up until now, you could only attach a limited amount of inference engines to an EC2 server instance. And now with serverless, you're basically not really limited anymore. And the next thing is the SageMaker Studio improvements. So SageMaker, as people might recognize, is the name of the umbrella name of all of the machine learning, custom machine learning things that AWS provides. It has notebooks, it has example code, it has a button that you click and you get machines ready to run and train your models. It has integration with S3, everything that you might imagine you might need as a data scientist that doesn't want to mess about with instances. You get under the SageMaker panel. And SageMaker Studio is kind of a serverless panel because you get the notebooks running in a browser, so you don't even need to run the notebooks on your own computer and upload the code anywhere. And then Amazon have really been pushing more and more enhancements in there. One of these enhancements is recommending the right inference to use for your model. So as you're writing your model, you don't exactly know what kind of inference infrastructure you might need, and they would give you a recommendation and configure the things for you and things like that, if I understand this correctly.
Yeah, so it's taking some of those decision points away that we often make mistakes on in terms of the infrastructure, how to deploy, and certainly stuff that we're seeing from our customers as well, where they're not really optimized in terms of best cost or whatever that may be. So anything that can really help customers and make those right decisions first time, and then tweak from there and iteratively get better and better at it is fantastic for me. So a couple of new features there, really good for helping customers get to the right models as quickly as possible without having to worry about the infrastructure. And it's something that, I've had especially a couple of customers talk about, relatively how difficult it is in AWS land to sort of focus on the thing that they want to focus on, which is the machine learning, and not focus on the infrastructure that goes around it. They're not really that interested in that side of it. So this is a great enabler for that.
It's similar to what we said before about infrastructure as a service. When you work on machine learning, you're usually doing it in a notebook, which is a technology that takes Python code and structures it together with documentation in a single memory space so that you can experiment within that memory space. So notebooks are great, but until now you've had to spin up a virtual machine to do it. And to me, this seems very backwards. I mean, I have a laptop, but why am I paying for a machine in the cloud? That's so 2008, where you say, I don't want to pay for the hardware, but instead I'll pay Amazon to run the hardware for me. It means that the notebook has to be turned off each night, otherwise I'm paying for it all night long. It's just running there doing nothing. It means that if I want to get more power for my machine learning, I either have to have a larger virtual machine or, of course, call out to AWS APIs. That's great, but I'd rather not be thinking about all this. I'd rather just be calling APIs that do everything for me.
Right. So for those who are not following, that's the difference between SageMaker and SageMaker Studio. So the Studio is the notebook that you're being provided with as a service. And in SageMaker, you could, well, until maybe even today, you could just spin up a machine that runs the notebook for you, which is a bit backwards. Another thing that came to SageMaker is compilation that is optimized for GPUs. So there are different machine learning algorithms, like for example natural language processing or computer vision, that are basically working much better on GPUs. And whether you're using TensorFlow or PyTorch, which are the two more popular frameworks to write the Python code that creates machine learning, you wouldn't usually know how to optimize them and how to compile the Python code into code that is actually running on the GPU in a good enough way, or fast, or I don't know, some other limitations that data scientists don't really want to mess about with. And this year, AWS released SageMaker compiled GPU models, I think it's called, that helps you to just not think about it and you just get a good result. Anything to add, Joshua?
That makes sense. As I was saying, the notebook is very much for experimenting, iteratively working with everything inside one memory space, potentially calling out to APIs. But that is not what you want for a pipeline. So once you're done playing around, you want to convert that code into something that's runnable on the server. If you think about how what it was in the old days, you could develop software for the desktop or for the server, very different things. So this helps you transfer from your data scientist experimentation into a production-ready model.
Right, and let's jump to the real innovation that got released this year, and that is SageMaker Canvas. So up until now, we mentioned that in order to do custom machine learning, you had to write Python code in something called the notebook. And that is something that only data science Python developers can do. AWS are trying to kind of allow more people who want to dig into data to be able to dig into data and create models themselves. And this is where they came up with something called SageMaker Canvas, which basically is a visual way to visualize your data, to visualize the analysis of that data, to visualize the predictions that your analysis might yield, and kind of remove the need to write code in order to get insights.
As with all automatic codeless builders, I'm very suspicious as to whether you can get real production work out of it. I think in the end, you do need the expertise to write a little bit of code, but this can be good for reproducible experimentation, by which I mean your organization that's already analyzing your marketing data, or whatever it is. Day by day, you're doing fairly similar things. You've already got a good process going, but now you have a need to analyze perhaps a slightly different type of data or to slightly change things. And for this, it can be good to allow people who are not coders to experiment and to just try things out, and then perhaps build a simple model, see that things can even work, and pass it on to the data scientists. I said earlier that 90% of machine learning is data cleansing, but of the remaining 10%, 90% is just messing around with it to even understand what the data can give you. After all, nobody's guaranteeing that a given bunch of data will give you the answers that you want. So with this type of tool, you may be able to get preliminary results and learn that yes, the answers are hiding inside the data, and machine learning can bring them out.
Well, this is a no-code approach, and we've seen quite a bit of this. You saw Honeycomb last year, which was released in beta by AWS. That didn't really go anywhere. You've seen the other cloud providers doing, no-code solutions as well. I think the nice thing is that it gives you the opportunity to just try something without having to cost an entire arm of your department to go and build out something and work out that actually the information isn't there or we do need it. So that whole sort of fail-fast flywheel is working really well for something like this. So you go off, try it, get some results and go, yeah, that's brilliant. Now we need to create maybe a production environment. And Joshua, you were saying there's potentially some areas there that it needs some help with. You're going to have to knuckle down and get some code done. But I think it's a great way to start creating things, start to understand and explore your data. And 9 times out of 10, when you start exploring, you do discover things that you'd never thought of before. You don't even know what the questions are, let alone what the answers are. And by going through that data, being able to get some sort of visualization, some sort of understanding of what's happening within that data as well. If this enables that, great. It just means that we all win. So why not?
Yeah, and I think that in many cases, when you even have a trained model, part of the exercise is to tweak the various parameters of that model. And if this SageMaker canvas allows you to visualize all this tweaking in some pre-made graphs that are showing you how it affects your results, then that is going to be really powerful for people who, one person can write all the graphs himself in the notebook, but other people might just want to play around with the model and see what kind of results they can get, and maybe run it on a slightly different subset of the same data or whatever, and see the results.
Yeah, I mean, we all have different views and different perspectives of where we're coming from when we're looking at these data points anyway. So if it opens up to more people to visualize it and to be able to understand what's actually in the data, yeah, great. Let's do that.
Yeah, and I guess one last thing we might want to mention about innovations is the integration of SageMaker with EMR, with the Elastic Machine MapReduce service, which also got a serverless version this year. It did. And, if people are using MapReduce, you know who you are. It's this huge monster, huge beast that knows to crunch petabytes or teraflops or whatever of data, whatever that is. And if it was a pain to use it with SageMaker before, I guess it's simpler to use it now with SageMaker.
So it's always been possible to run EMR together with SageMaker machine learning. After all, EMR is one of the good ways to process enormous amounts of data. And then what do you do when you're processing? Well, often it's training. And that has been possible for a while. But now they've integrated that into Studio so that you can connect to EMR, discover the EMR clusters, and trigger the EMR processes. The truth is that EMR is not easy to use. It's based on the old concept of Hadoop and Spark, which still require you to very much understand the code and also how the code is running in a distributed way. So that there are more and more modern ways as the years go by, but still EMR is in common use. And if you are going to use it, you want data scientists to, as little as possible, have to deal with the underlying code and distribution of processing.
So these are more or less the innovations that we wanted to touch on. And there's one more thing. There's one more thing. The one more thing is I wouldn't call it an innovation, but it's kind of a gateway to people to get into machine learning that AWS have introduced this year. And it's called SageMaker Studio Lab. Like if you were confused before SageMaker and SageMaker Studio before, Now you have a third thing called SageMaker Studio Lab, which is completely different from the other two. What what it does is basically gives you SageMaker Studio for free. Okay, so you can use that completely free of charge. You don't even need to have an AWS account. You just need to go to SageMaker Studio Lab, register, and you get a separate account where you can run a notebook for 12 hours, either CPU 1 or GPU 1, and run some non-too complicated machine learning experiments for absolutely free. You have tons of examples. You have a whole coursework that you can follow, a tutorial to learn how to do new things. If you don't know what machine learning is, how to write models, then it basically gives you a platform when you can learn anything you want. It's completely open to plug in any kind of thing you can think of or download from the internet. AWS already has a ton of examples that you can use, and you can just copy paste them in here and try them out.
This is really important because machine learning is expensive. And if you're not on a corporate budget, or if you are in a corporation but have some mercy on the budget, then it can be really scary to think that you're playing around and that will cost real money. After all, when you're learning a programming language, it's free nowadays, everything's open source. But with machine learning, you need some real compute power. And that may mean, as I said earlier, a notebook, which is really a virtual machine. It may mean calling out to APIs that can cost you money. When I say real money, well, it can be any amount, but even just a little bit of playing around can be a few $dozen. So it's good to have a free choice where you're comfortable knowing that you can experiment and it's not going to cost you. And Amazon makes it very easy to sign up. You don't even need a full AWS account. So it's a good way to get people started.
Right. And at the moment, you already can upload Python notebooks to GitHub, and you can open them there and you can see the content, but you cannot really run the notebooks on GitHub all that much, maybe some basic stuff. This Studio Lab allows you to link in your GitHub README file, you can give a link to this SageMaker Studio Lab, and it will actually run your example code that you made for a, university project or whatever it might be.
That's lovely. Great idea. And it supports that sort of collaboration piece as well, where the code may not be yours, but you've got an idea on how to fork that code and turn it into something you want to use yourself.
Yeah. So if you want to deep dive into learning machine learning and you don't want to pay an arm and a leg for that, this is your gateway.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, the value to Amazon is that you're bringing all your data to S3, and then from there it'll fan out, drive other services, and make it ultimately more sticky for you to be able to use those services. So yeah, good.
Or you're just training more and more people in your organization, or just young people who are getting into the industry. Yeah, which will eventually be using SageMaker in AWS.
Perfect. Great stuff. Hi, Evgeny and Joshua, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate your insights on what's actually been happening, some of the good events that's happening out of reInvent. And I suppose, lastly, I'd just like to thank you all for joining us today. If you'd like to talk to us in depth about any of these subjects or anything else, just curious about machine learning, how it's going to enable your business, just get in touch with us and we'd love to hear from you. So you can reach out to us via our website, which is doit-intl.com. Or if you're an existing customer, reach out to your account manager or the team that you normally talk to, and be more than happy to sort of impart some knowledge and help you understand how you can start, how you can improve your machine learning journeys. So with that, that's a goodbye from me. So thanks very much.
It was good. Thank you. Evgeny, Jason, appreciated that.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.